Hello, and welcome to episode 3 of Cause and Effect. I'm so happy you're joining me. Today, we're going to be talking about what it's like when you're just not feeling work, when you wish you could love your job again. And I wonder, do you ever wish that you could find the motivation, the energy, the passion that brought you into this sector in the first place? And if you're honest, have you also found yourself wondering how you're going to motivate your team when you're struggling to motivate yourself? If any of that resonates, you're not alone and you are not failing. What you're experiencing has a name and it has causes, and there is a way through it. The leaders I work with often describe a feeling of going through the motions. On one hand, they often can't switch off from work. There is a constant worry, but they also feel detached from it. And the excitement that they used to feel just isn't there anymore. And sometimes this turns into dread and, in the worst cases, resentment. And often this feeling has crept up so gradually, they didn't notice until they were already deep in it. At work, you might feel like you're functioning, you're showing up, you're doing what needs to be done, but you feel like you're coasting, that you're not getting to all the things you should be doing because you can't quite make yourself do them. You find that you pretend everything is okay because you're the leader and the leader is supposed to have it all together. You worry that whilst no one's noticed yet, eventually they will, that the mask you're wearing will eventually slip. What will happen if they realize you're not as invested as you once were? As Sunday evening approaches, that knot in your stomach tightens at the dread of going back to it all, the emails, the meetings, the problems that you know are going to be waiting for you. And it's really hard because you used to look forward to Monday. You were excited to get up and get to work, but now you're not. And so then the guilt hits and you feel like you have to overwork to compensate, to prove to yourself and everyone else that you're still committed, which exhausts you further, which makes the motivation harder to find. And round you go, trapped in this cycle. And what makes this particularly painful for the leaders that I work with is that they remember what it felt like when they loved their work, to be excited by it, to feel like it meant something. And the gap between then and now is distressing in a way that is really difficult to explain to people outside of the sector because this was never just a job. It was always a part of who you are, and it almost feels like a calling. And somewhere along the way, it stopped feeling like that. And so, understanding what contributes to losing your motivation really matters because without understanding that, the usual advice of remembering your why, thinking about the impact you're having, tends to just fall flat for us. Not because it's the wrong advice, but it doesn't actually address what's going on for you. And the first reason this happens is that the sector almost sets you up for it. It draws people in because of the meaning and the purpose of the work, which means when that passion starts to fade, it's not just demotivating, it can feel quite disorientated. It touches your sense of identity and it makes you wonder who you are if you don't love this work anymore. And as you move up in an organization, the day to day work often moves further and further away from the reason you joined. The frontline impact gets harder to see, and you find yourself doing more admin work, more management work. And that feels really far away from what drew you here. And you can find yourself trapped in work that just isn't interesting to you, that doesn't work to your strengths, sort of takes you away from the things that you know you should be doing, um, and not the things that you love to do. And the strategic work, which you really want to be focused on, gets lost in everything else. And this is the thing, the meaningful, interesting, rewarding work is still there, but sometimes you have to work harder to find it. And when you're exhausted and caught in the day to day, that's really challenging to do. The second reason is a cycle that keeps you stuck. When you are in this state, you start to only notice the negatives, the difficult meeting, the knockbacks, the team stressors, the work that you dread. And the positives, the wins, the impact, the moments of connection, the work you love, it sort of starts to slip past unnoticed. It's still there, but you're just not seeing it because your focus is so much on the stuff that you're not enjoying or that's difficult or is taking you away from it. And so you build a story that confirms how you're feeling. And because you're too caught in the day to day to step back, it's very hard to find your way out from the inside of it. And this is just how our brains work under pressure. But knowing this is happening is the first step to breaking that cycle and rediscovering that motivation, which is still there. And the third reason is about how we think about motivation itself. The trouble is, we often think motivation is something we either have or we don't. But it's rare for any of us to be motivated by every single aspect of our job. And just as we're unlikely to be completely disengaged unless we're already at the point of burnout, which is something much bigger than a loss of motivation. So instead of thinking about motivation as a binary, think of it as a scale from 1 to 5, which you move between depending on what you're doing and how you're feeling about it. If we think about this scale, we can think of number 1 as won't do. You're disengaged, and at some point, you just stop loving the job completely. So we might be sort of at the stage of burnout right now. 2 is when we feel like we have to do things. You are in survival mode. You are driven by compliance, fear, and the deadlines which are beating down on you. And you're doing the work because you have to, not because you want to. 3 is this feeling that we should do things. You know what you should be doing. You know it's good for you or for the organization. But the should feels very heavy, and you often have guilt and anxiety associated with this feeling of should. 4 is when we're sort of in that stage of wanting to do things. You're doing the work because it feels good, you're enjoying it, it's interesting, and because it connects to what matters to you. This is where engaged workers spend most of the time when things are working well. These are the tasks that really light you up. And 5 is love to. You're fully absorbed in what you're doing. You love it and it holds your interest. If you feel like you're going through the motions, it's a sign that you've slipped from spending most of your time in 4 or 5 down to 1, 2, or maybe 3. The question to ask is what shifted? Because understanding that is central to knowing what you need to do to rekindle your motivation. So, what can you actually do about it? So, the steps I'm going to share with you aren't about forcing positivity or telling yourself to feel differently. They're about making deliberate, practical changes that create the conditions for motivation to return and help you to notice the good in your job, which in turn is going to reinforce that. The first step is to use the 5 point scale that I just talked you through. Think about your main tasks and responsibilities. Where do you sit on that scale for each of those right now? For the ones which are sitting at 1 or 2, what would it take to move them to a 3? Sometimes a small shift in how you approach the task, who you do it with, planning a reward, or when you schedule it in your week or month can move you 1 point along and kind of can make you feel a little bit more engaged in it. And that can have a bigger impact than you'd expect. The second step is to notice what energizes you and what drains you. So for 1 week, just pay attention. What tasks leave you feeling alive, engaged, and interested? And which ones leave you feeling flat or heavy or resentful? Now, make sure you write this down so you can kind of keep track of where things are landing. And once you've done this, pay attention to the ones that energize you. How can you plan this through your day, your week, your month, your quarter, your year? As one of my clients put it, how can you sprinkle your week with joy? Plan these energizing tasks regularly throughout your working life. And where possible, do the draining ones when you're most resourced, not when you're running on empty. And I know you can't always control what's on your list, or when something's going to come into your inbox, but you can control some of that, some of the when and how you approach those tasks. And if we can do that 80% of the time, that's going to keep you protected for the 20% you can't. The third step is to reconnect the draining tasks to your meaning. The tasks that don't hold your interest or that you dread, the reporting, the spreadsheets, the endless meetings, they don't exist in a vacuum. They all help you meet the charitable aims, and they're necessary to make the work possible. So, how can you connect those tasks back to the thread of why you're here? Now, this is important. This isn't about pretending that you enjoy these things. It's not about pretending that they light you up, but it's about stepping back, seeing how they connect to the bigger picture, and to help you tap into that intrinsic motivation by knowing what they contribute to you and your charity's goals. And that will help them feel like something maybe that you want to do, even if they don't light you up. The fourth step is to ask yourself a difficult question. Are your values still aligned with the organization's? Is this work still exciting to you? Is it still challenging you in the right way? Does the culture feel like somewhere you can thrive? These aren't easy questions, but they do matter, because sometimes going through the motions is a signal not that something is wrong with you or the organization, but just that your time somewhere has run its course. And there's no shame in that. It's really important that our careers enable us to grow, that they challenge us, that they help us evolve. And sometimes that means it's time to end the work relationship we're in. And that can be one of the most courageous things you do as a leader, to acknowledge that you've outgrown the role and it's time for change. And that's courageous for you, but it's also courageous for the charity, because if it's time for you to move on to something new, that opens up opportunity for the charity as well. And the fifth step is to take a step back. If these other four steps don't help you, then it might be time to create some distance. You can't find perspective from inside the problem. Sometimes the perspective only comes with some distance, whether that is taking a break through a walk, a conversation with a peer, or with some time with a coach. Creating space to reflect rather than just react is how you start to see the wood for the trees. Going through the motions feels difficult, but it doesn't mean that the work doesn't matter to you or that you're not a good leader. And it isn't permanent. It's a sign that something has shifted in the balance between what the work demands and what you get back in terms of interest, enjoyment, and your development. And that balance can change again, but only if we create the space to notice what's happening and to make some deliberate choices about what comes next. The leaders I work with who find their way back to loving the work rarely do it by trying harder or trying to think more positively. They do it by being honest about what's missing and making small but deliberate changes on how they work.